Now, I know what you're thinking. Re-Goodification is not a word. That's fair, but you've got to admit that you know exactly what I mean. World of Warcraft has been, for the duration of its existence, simultaneously the most successful MMORPG in the history of the industry and in a perpetual downward spiral towards an end-of-service announcement. You don't get to have a reputation for being both the best and the worst without being the most important. Whether you like it or not, World of Warcraft has always been and continues to be the king of the MMO genre. The thing is, about 5 years ago, Blizzard's prominence waned so deeply that World of Warcraft nearly lost hold of that title by virtue of self-inflicted choices in an absolute shitstorm of a news cycle. Today, I'd like to reflect on those 5 years, which have seen World of Warcraft claw back from the brink and reinvent itself into a game that's not only unique from itself during its provenance, but especially from its lowest point at the height of Shadowlands. But this is about more than the herculean effort of a live service game to survive in spite of everyone rooting against it. There is a price to pay to re-goodify a game. A price that climbs exponentially as the years accumulate. With midnight fast approaching, could it be that, in spite of Blizzard's best efforts, it's simply too late? This is the Re-Goodification of World of Warcraft. Get all videos 2 days early and ad-free for only $1 a month on Patreon or YouTube memberships.
I will never serve.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Enough time has passed that people have started to forget what it was like to play Shadowlands when it was live. Looking back, it's easy to focus on the story of the expansion as its greatest failure, which is understandable. Shadowlands seems singularly hellbent on denigrating the once beloved lore of the Warcraft franchise. It pinned the undercurrent of conflict over the last 30 years on a villain that barely managed to bore the audience. It denigrated the memory of some of the franchise's most celebrated characters. And it turned the only character that people actually enjoyed into a butter knife. For some of us, narrative is the foundation upon which the gameplay experience is built. I'm not that guy. So when I remember Shadowlands, my thoughts go to the game's fundamental design principles, which were the product of a completely different development studio. The Blizzard of today is not the Blizzard of November 23rd, 2020, when Shadowlands set a PC gaming sales record and sent its players into the dumbest afterlife conceived in fiction. Back then, Blizzard's core design philosophy was restrictive, oppressive, and obsessed with the idea of bothering players as much as possible. Now, that isn't an exaggeration. Ian Hazzikostas repeatedly discussed the idea of friction and meaningful choice during the lead up to the launch of Shadowlands, as well as throughout its lifecycle, which revealed to players the studio's real priorities.
But I think the goal in creating a choice is for it to be a difficult one.
This was also evident in the game's systems, which were extremely stringent and obviously meant to force the player into interacting with them to the designer specifications rather than for the sake of fun. There are a number of examples of this. Torghast, for instance, was a back-of-the-box feature during Shadowlands. Development time and resources were spent building a roguelike inside of World of Warcraft. Naturally, the developers were going to compel players to engage with Torghast, or the entire thing would be seen as a waste in the development pipeline. Thus, it was linked to the player's legendary equipment and made to be run twice per week. By the time that Shadowlands' final patch cycle rolled around, legendaries would be unbound from Torghast, but even that wasn't exactly a win. Now, World of Warcraft has yet another piece of content that's going to be relegated to the dustbin of the game's history, serving neither an intrinsic nor an extrinsic purpose to the broader gameplay experience. Torghast wasn't the only offender. Conduit energy to restrict player customization, mount restrictions and the Eye of the Jailer in the Maw to limit movement and to elongate the reputation grind, a time-gated mechanism to switch between covenants in order to make the choice more meaningful. If The War Within was built on the same design pillars that served as Shadowlands' foundation, then we would all have a very different impression of World of Warcraft today. So how did we go from all of that to all of this? Against all odds, Blizzard experienced a complete metamorphosis, which led to a paradigm shift in how they approached game design. The Re-Goodification of World of Warcraft began on November 2nd, 2021, with the release of patch 9.1.5 during arguably the worst patch cycle in the game's history, Chains of Domination. It was an interstitial patch, sure, but it's my opinion that 9.1.5 should be remembered as the most important patch in the history of World of Warcraft. It represented the complete dissolution of the archaic design philosophy, which was responsible for a great deal of player consternation for years. It was the realization that player friction and meaningful choice could coexist with player agency and fun. Conduit energy was completely removed from the game, covenant swapping no longer incurred penalties, players could skip the dreaded Maw intro. These changes weren't terribly exciting, but they suggested a new and hopefully improved direction for World of Warcraft. Players had heard that all before though. Blizzard creates a problem which the player base actively warns them about to no avail, only to patch the solution into the game a year later in lieu of content. It is a tale as old as time, yet things felt different. This time, someone was eating World of Warcraft's lunch.
Become the warrior of darkness.
At the time, it became incredibly popular to compare Final Fantasy XIV to World of Warcraft and to identify all the ways in which the former was superior to the latter. The public consensus was that 14 was the more functional, player-friendly, and well-stewarded MMO, and that Blizzard would be wise to take a page out of Creative Studio 3's book. It seemed for a moment that World of Warcraft had been dethroned for the first time since it released, but I had my doubts. 14 has its own set of issues, which went largely ignored until Dawn Trail delivered us one of the worst narrative experiences in the history of video games, but we don't need to talk about that again. It's easy to imagine the pressure that Blizzard must have felt to borrow ideas from the game that everyone was comparing World of Warcraft to, so they did the smart thing. They didn't. Throughout the studio's history, Blizzard has been known to take another developer's gameplay design and refine it into something better. A recent example is Overwatch, which borrowed heavily from Team Fortress 2, becoming the quintessential hero shooter. An example more relevant to the video is World of Warcraft itself, which borrowed from EverQuest, improving upon its visual clarity and removing experience penalties for dying. Instead of looking to Final Fantasy XIV for inspiration, which would have been the obvious choice, it's my opinion that Blizzard looked to a completely different MMORPG. I think that the game which inspired the Re-Goodification of World of Warcraft the most was Guild Wars 2. Earlier this year, I uploaded a video about Guild Wars 2, which did fairly well. I wasn't expecting that, because the game is criminally overlooked in the MMO genre. The game feels vibrant and alive. There's so much to see and to explore at a price that no one else can beat. As I delved deeper into Guild Wars 2, I started to notice traces of its design and some of the features that were introduced during Dragonflight and the War Within. Now, obviously Dynamic Flight is borrowing heavily from Guild Wars 2's stellar mount system, but that's not the only similarity that I noticed between the two MMOs. A close friend of mine described Guild Wars 2 to me as a series of fantasy novels. You can read through the series at your own leisure, putting it down if other things interest you more in the moment, then pick it up where you left off. The game isn't designed to leave you behind. Its content is truly evergreen, so if you want to complete everything in Heart of Thorns, which is a 10-year-old expansion at this point, you can go back and do that and still have a meaningful gameplay experience. World of Warcraft was never built with that kind of longevity in mind. From the moment that the Dark Portal was opened, it became evident that Blizzard was stewarding World of Warcraft as though it was in a state of managed decline. Each expansion to the game diminished the previous ones, leading to a parasitic design cycle in which content and features would be introduced, then immediately discarded when it was time for the launch of the next expansion. What you have here are two completely different design philosophies at play. One is ephemeral, while the other is evergreen. I theorized that Blizzard began to wonder if World of Warcraft couldn't have the best of both worlds, which is what takes us to the War Within. One of the current expansion's major back-of-the-box features wasn't content per se, but a monumental quality of life improvement in warbands. While a push towards account unification is something that players have been asking for since the beginning of World of Warcraft's lifecycle, what I found more intriguing was Blizzard's commitment to retroactively updating older expansions to work with the system. The War Within introduced account-wide renown progression, which was a humongous win. Eventually, that improvement was applied to the previous expansion, Dragonflight. Naturally, you'd expect Blizzard to work its way down the list: Shadowlands, BFA, Legion, and so on. Can you imagine having a sleek UI and modernized gameplay to grind out the Timbermaw hold reputation? Maybe some world quests or delves to invite players to go back and engage with forgotten parts of the game? It seems to me that World of Warcraft is headed in precisely that direction, which would be a gargantuan effort even for a studio as large as Blizzard. To retroactively apply evergreen design to 20 years of forgotten content will take unimaginable amounts of time and development resources, but if they can pull it off, then World of Warcraft would have that same feeling that Guild Wars 2 has, like a book that you can pick up and enjoy at any time. When you look at World of Warcraft's world map, what you're seeing are a bunch of vestigial organs. The only place that matters is the current place. I think it's clear that Blizzard wants the whole world to feel alive and for players to be outside, exploring, adventuring, and having fun, just like Guild Wars 2. More evidence of this effort came in the form of the removal of ranked PvP from the weekly vault in exchange for delves and world quests. More than raids or Mythic Plus dungeons, delves and world quests represent immediately playable content. This is incredibly important to an MMO, although it's often overlooked by game designers. When you log into an MMO, say Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of the time, the first thing you'll do is open a menu and queue for an activity. Your mileage will vary on wait times depending on what you're playing and what time of day you've logged in, but one way or another, you're standing in Limsa waiting nonetheless. Blizzard caught on to this critical component of MMOs during Dragonflight and has held fast to it in the War Within. Think about how Valdrakken was structured. While not exactly in the center or the highest peak of the Dragon Isles, a player could see every biome from the city and due to its height, hop onto his or her dragon and fly outwards towards an objective. While that expansion lacked the same density of world content and delves, it was clear that Blizzard was committed to that feeling of immediate playability. Had they instead focused on their more apparent competition in Final Fantasy XIV, they may have gone in a different and more stilted direction. In spite of its shift towards more evergreen design, Blizzard deepened its use of limited events to drive player engagement. If you download all of your opinions wholesale from content creators, then you've probably been led to believe that FOMO, or fear of missing out for the uninitiated, is a universally bad thing. It employs artificial scarcity of digital goods to drive engagement. I'd ask you, why is that a bad thing? Since Dragonflight, World of Warcraft has introduced several limited time events that have been great. Mists of Pandaria Remix gave me a reason to explore an expansion that I never played. I'm looking forward to Legion Remix for the same reason. Plunderstorm should not have worked as well as it did, especially when you looked at the idea on paper, but it was a solid alternative to the game's regular offerings, and I'm looking forward to it coming back. More than any other MMO on the market, World of Warcraft seems to be embracing both the evergreen philosophy of games like Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, and its own limited time philosophy with special events and, of course, its core seasonal loop. To have an upcoming feature that's meant to stand the test of time, like housing, alongside urgent blink-and-you'll-miss-it expansion remixes, demonstrates a boldness in game design that I would never have expected from Blizzard 4.5 years ago when they released Shadowlands. This is a completely different studio. There's more to say about this Re-Goodification effort from Blizzard. For example, having a more compelling villain and stronger writing does a great deal of good for player investment in your ecosystem. Being willing to take risks and surprise your players with totally transformative features like Drive, which, let me remind you, was not an advertised back-of-the-box feature for the War Within, is part of what makes the ongoing development of World of Warcraft so exciting. Making the game more immediately playable rather than restricted by systems or arbitrary lockouts lifts attention from players that would have otherwise prevented them from enjoying what Blizzard worked so hard to create. All of this is good, but I'd like to point out one small detail that I have deliberately failed to address throughout the video. Why exactly is there an asterisk beside the word Re-Goodification in the title? Because the point of this video isn't only to reflect on how World of Warcraft has transformed itself over the last half-decade. This Re-Goodification has come at a cost, which Blizzard may not have the ability to pay. In spite of how canny Blizzard has been since Shadowlands, rebuilding World of Warcraft's reputation one great idea at a time, the truth is that the game is old. On October 22nd, 2024, WoW turned 20, and it is becoming impossible to ignore the weight of the technical debt that this game has incurred. Have you attempted a world boss recently? The server infrastructure is tearing apart at the seams, desperately fighting to hold everything in place. Performance issues, game-breaking bugs, undercooked features. The most recent patch, 11.1.5, released with a litany of disastrous bugs that go as far as the main event, Nightfall, being unplayable at launch. The cooldown manager, which should have been a replacement for weak Rs, launched without customization options, and it even caused a visual bug that prevented personal buffs from appearing on the resource bar. The weekly vault had an inexplicable bug in which players received duplicate items. The bug was addressed, but the affected players were simply out of luck. World of Warcraft is simultaneously better than it has ever been, and it's falling apart. About a year ago, Blizzard voiced a commitment to an 8-week patch cycle in order to maintain the highest possible engagement from its players. Personally, as a Final Fantasy XIV player, anything faster than an 18-week patch cycle is impressive, but is the juice worth the squeeze? You see, what that asterisk really represents is that the process of Re-Goodification is terminally incomplete. World of Warcraft cannot truly be re-goodified while it exists on its 2 decades-old foundation. It obviously can't sustain a production pipeline that is more committed to an 8-week cycle than it is to quality assurance. The game feels bad. It's still the game that I love, now more than ever, but the simple act of playing it is an ongoing reminder of the technical debt that Blizzard has borrowed against for the better part of 20 years. There are whispers of a sequel to World of Warcraft coming after the World Soul Saga reaches its conclusion, and I'd like to count myself among those who would love to see the sun set on this version of Azeroth in exchange for a clean slate upon which Blizzard can build the game that they're trying to force World of Warcraft to become. As much as I want to celebrate the developers' efforts to retroactively transform World of Warcraft with a new vision for the future, the simple fact is that, barring some miracle, World of Warcraft will be crushed under the weight of its own technical debt. The Re-Goodification of World of Warcraft demands more than quality of life. It demands a new lease on life altogether in the form of a realm reborn. That's the video, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've made it this far, then do me a solid and leave me a like. It's a great way to help the channel reach new people. A massive thank you to JG Chowder on Patreon for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can get all videos 2 days early and ad-free for only $1 a month on Patreon or YouTube memberships. It's the best deal in town. I would love to hear your thoughts on the subject of the future of World of Warcraft, so feel free to leave a comment and I'd be happy to respond. Otherwise, have a great week. God bless you, and minding my manners, of course. Thanks for watching.